We have heard with our ears, O God, our fathers have told us, what work thou didst in their days, in the times of old, how thou didst drive out the heathen with thy hand, and plantest them, how thou didst afflict the people and cast them out. For they got not the land in possession by their own sword, neither did their own arm save them, but thy right hand and thine arm, and the light of thy countenance, because thou hadst a favor unto them. Now we are going to see something, for this psalm is one of the greatest doctrinal views of Daniel's 70th week found anywhere in the Bible. The psalm shows the condition of Israel on earth while the marriage of the Lamb is taking place in heaven. Verse 45. Exactly as the Lord shows Israel's condition on earth, Job chapter 1 to 42, while a marriage is going on in the king's palace, Esther chapter 1 to 2. With Selah in the context, Jews being sold as slaves, verse 12, and being sacrificed and eaten alive, verse 11 and 22, with the son of perdition fulfilling Revelation chapter 13 literally, verse 1, with a shadow of death, Isaiah chapter 9 verse 2, Job chapter 10 verses 21 to 22, in operation and the conditions of Exodus chapters 1 to 3 repeated, verses 23-24, plus a prayer for the second advent, verse 26. What work thou didst in their days, verse 1, is explained in verses 2 and 3. It's the events recorded in Exodus and Joshua. This is called a parable in Psalm chapter 78, verse 2. It will take place again. The writer of Hebrews is so sure that it will take place again that he likens the tribulation generation to the generation that came up under Joshua and Caleb. Hebrews chapter 3 verse 4. Verses 2 and 3 are clear to anyone who reads Deuteronomy chapters 1 to 10, Joshua chapters 1 to 10, and Judges chapters 1 to 4. Devotionally, one may ask, what work is God doing these days? Further, we see that second-hand knowledge is better than no knowledge. But first-hand knowledge is still the best. See Joshua chapter 2 verse 9 and Judges verse 7 verses 9 to 11. Spiritually, we may observe that victory over the flesh, typified by Israel's victories over Amalek, the Moabites, Ammonites, and Amorites, is through Jesus Christ by grace, not self-effort. Neither did their own arm save them. Verse 3. Thou art my king, O God, command deliverances for Jacob. Through thee will we push down our enemies. Through thy name will we tread them under that rise up against us. For I will not trust in my bow, neither shall my sword save me. But thou hast saved us from our enemies, and hast put them to shame that hated us. In God we boast all the day long, and praise thy name for ever, Selah. Note that the nation is involved in the individual petition. God may be the king of the writer, my king, O God, verse 4. But what follows is deliverances for Jacob. We, us, we. Verses 5, 7, and 8. At the Advent, Israel does triumph over her enemies. She does tread them down, verse 5. She is saved, verse 7. And her enemies are put to shame. Then Israel will boast all the day long about God, verse 8. And right here at this point, verse 8, the Lord suddenly divides the word of truth, exactly as he does it again in Psalm chapter 89, verses 37, 38. But thou hast cast off and put us to shame, and goest not forth with our armies. Thou makest us to turn back from the enemy, and they which hate us spoil for themselves. Thou hast given us like sheep appointed for meat, and hast scattered us among the heathen. Thou sellest thy people for naught, and doesn't increase thy wealth by their price. Thou makest us a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and derision to them that are round about us. Thou makest us a byword among the heathen, a shaking of the head among the people. My confusion is continually before me, and the shame of my face hath covered me. For the voice of him that reproacheth and blasphemeth by reason of the enemy and avenger. Verses 9 through 16 describe Israel in the church age and at the end of the tribulation. 1. The Jews have no armies from Anno Domini 70 to 1945, verse 9. 2. In the tribulation they will lose the battles in Palestine due to Antichrist, verse 10. 3. They were scattered in the church age, and they will be sold for slaves in the tribulation, verse 12. Verse 13 applies from Anno Domini 70 to 2020 plus, as does verse 14. The psalmist speaks for his nation in the first person in verse 15. Notice this eyewitness of the historical event which foreshadowed all this not only spoke in the first person for the nation but for the city of Jerusalem. See Lamentation chapter 1 verses 15-19. The enemy and avenger, verse 16, is identified so clearly in Revelation chapter 12 verse 9 and chapter 13 verse 6 that only the original autographs and the Dead Sea Scrolls could keep you from finding the truth. The blasphemer of Revelation chapter 13 verse 6 is in Jerusalem, which now becomes Sodom and Egypt. Revelation chapter 11 verse 8, and is literally blaspheming with the names of blasphemy. Revelation chapter 17 verse 3 on his forehead.